Hi there, I'm Kristen with the Kansas City Mom Collective, and I'm here with Dr. Canty. Today, we will be talking about dehydration. It's something that with the Midwest heat quickly approaching, summer coming, it's a topic that was probably going to be pretty important for us parents to have on our radar. So we wanted to do a little quick interview and get some expert opinions and answer some questions about what we should be doing as parents to prepare ourselves. So, Dr. Canty, what are the signs of dehydration in children?
Well, so it's a great question, Kristen. And as I hydrate while we talk about this topic, I figure that's always important. I think the big thing we think about this time of the year is, are we talking about, and do we want to discuss dehydration, or do we want to talk about heat-related illnesses and how to try to prevent that? And what I mean by that is I think we talk about dehydration this time of the year. Normally, what we're trying to do is combat, heat illness. And I don't mean to confuse the topic, but I want to make sure we're clear on the things that we are discussing. Dehydration, typically, if you have an otherwise healthy kid in the summer, if they're getting dehydrated, it's really because we're not being proactive about preventing heat-related illnesses. When you really get dehydration, it is actually based on the fact that you're usually having fluid losses. So that means you got vomiting, you got diarrhea. And so I wanted to make sure that I made a distinction about that while we discussed it.
That's great.
Does it make sense? Or and I guess I can ask you whether we would like to focus a little bit on the heat, or we want to really talk about dehydration, which is for the most part caused by kids that are ill with vomiting and diarrhea or have other complex medical problems.
I think the heat-related illness will probably be better for us just because of the season that's approaching and what we can do to kind of help prevent some of that.
Exactly. I thought that's really what the question was. And I think that's what we're all trying to do is prevent dehydration. And I wanted to offer some confidence to the families out there that if you have an otherwise healthy child, that we can work hard to prevent dehydration, because we should be able to keep up with our fluid intake so that we don't become dehydrated. And I really think that's the big goal in the summer is how do we help our kids maintain hydration so that they don't have those symptoms of heat-related illness, such as, it can be as mild as fatigue, poor urine output, and it can be as severe as heat stroke, which we obviously want to try to prevent. And so that's why I want to make sure I was clear that we want to prevent heat-related illness is what we're really trying to make sure we emphasize over the summer, and hydration is one key step in that.
Okay, great. So if kids are really active in sports or playing outdoors or at the pool, they just want to be outside with their neighbor friends, kind of what is the protocol that we should be following to make sure that they don't get those heat-related illnesses?
Right. And now you're right down my alley, because I'm a sports medicine physician. And so we talk about this all the time, both in my clinic and with families, out in the community, teams that we cover. And hydration is key to try to prevent that, whether they're playing in the backyard or whether they're playing under the lights. And I think for your group too, you've got a broad range of folks. You've got a 5 or 6 year old playing in the backyard with friends, and some of the folks in your collective may, they got 17-year-old kids playing, in tournaments on the weekend. And so keep in mind the specific needs of those two ends of the spectrum. But the key, I think, that applies to all, that I try to get everyone to pay attention to, is start off the day hydrated. And we see so many kind of kids don't do this, and I'm going to give and so I think if you start off the day hydrated, you're at least starting on a level ground, where a lot of kids may be starting off the day dehydrated, and they don't drink much in the morning, they don't drink much throughout the day, they're not prepared, and then they go to practice, and so they're already a little bit behind, and then it's hard to catch up as they're out there exercising in the heat. And kids respond to the heat differently because of some new things that they're a little more sensitive to the heat maybe than us older adults are, particularly those younger kids. And so I think start off the day hydrated would be one of the big keys I would emphasize. And you can do that in a lot of fun ways. I'm going to give some props to one of my colleagues named Dr. Robertson, and that he used to always refer to a wake-up water. He had a big cup in the morning. He had a big old cup of wake-up water before he ever left the house and got going for the day. And I think that's a great concept to keep in mind for kids. Get your wake-up water, your wake-up smoothie, whatever it is that you like to enjoy in the morning, but really try to get in, 16 ounces, of fluid before you get out there and get going for the day. I think that could be something easy that applies to everyone.
Okay, good. And I'm glad you said that 16 because it's hard for us to quantify it really of what's appropriate. And so if you're saying 16 ounces maybe before they leave the house to go to play outside or to go to their tournament or whatever, and then what should that be throughout the day then? Should that just be as they're thirsty? Should it be every hour we're drinking another 8 ounces? What should that be from there?
I really like that you brought that up because that is going to differ. Again, we talked about two ends of that spectrum. A 5-year-old to guzzle 16, 20 ounces of water in the morning may just be another fight that moms and dads don't want to have because that's probably not going to happen. And so it can be very age appropriate. And I think that our body has shown over the years that we typically drink to, we respond to those triggers. And so overhydration is just as dangerous as underhydration.
Mhm.
And so I don't want to force it upon young athletes and people. You want it to be available. And so let's talk about a few different ends of that spectrum. And that the younger kids, you can start with 8 to 12 ounces to get them started in the morning. The older kid who's an athlete is going to be exercising in the heat or midday. You may want to be in that 16 to 20 range, but the number's not as important as emphasizing that they hydrate in the morning, first thing, and to get things started throughout the day. And then as you go about the day, it's also, we all, and I know I'm just like you all, would love to be able to say, drink 5 ounces every 15 minutes and you'll be happy. But there's probably not a magic formula. Because again, the young kid playing in the backyard is going to be different than the 17-year-old playing in a tournament, and it's in the heat's out there. So you're going to have to take into account, is it a sunny day? Where are we at? How much exposure do we have? But you want to be offering it in the heat, probably every 20 minutes or so is a good rule to offer them something to drink. Let them choose how much of that, because they drink too much that may make kids sick, particularly if they're playing a sport and things like that. But you want to be offering it every 15 to 20 minutes, I think is a reasonable time frame to think about. If you're going to be out there for extended periods of time, like I said, you may need it every 20 minutes. If you're only going to be out there for an hour at a time, it's probably not necessary. That
Mhm.
hydration emphasis is really, if you're going to be out for long periods of time throughout the day, more than an hour, you're going to really have to have a strategy or a plan in place as to what you're going to hydrate with and how often you're going to hydrate.
That's good. 20 minutes is much quicker than I anticipated. So I'm glad you said that.
Yeah, well, it's probably because I'm referencing those kids that are out in the heat. And again,
Mhm.
I'm not saying they've got to come over and I think it should be offered frequent water breaks. As you can tell from my hairdo, I played high school sports a long time ago, and unfortunately, I played in the day when people used to try to withhold water. It'd be like, well, we know that's not a good idea, and
Mhm.
we know if you've been on a sports field or to the neighborhood pool or in the backyard, you know that everybody you see now is packing around this.
Mhm.
So we're not a culture that lacks for our hydro flask and water bottles these days. And so make sure they're filled and make sure they're offered and make sure they're available, and take into account that if it's going to be a hot day, that you encourage your athletes to take small frequent drinks along the way.
Okay, good to know. So there's also all of these products now that are helping to, with that dehydration problem. There's Prime that just came out. There's Gatorade. There's the IV packets. There's Pedialyte, Powerade, Propel. Are those something that we should be offering, or are those just kind of marketing tools?
It's a great question. First of all, remind people their products. There are things that, folks are selling all kinds of stuff, and hydration is key. And I want to draw one distinction right up front. And that is the difference between the kind of sports drinks that people refer to and energy drinks. There's been a lot of blurring of those lines. And this may not apply to the younger end of the spectrum we were discussing. Hopefully, or at least not in my household, am I allowing any of my younger kids to have energy drinks. I don't need them to have more energy. But some of the older kids are starting to dabble in that. And I want to make sure that that's clear, that because sometimes you can't tell. They look quite similar to the way they're marketed to people. And I really want to make sure that the American Academy of Pediatrics says there's absolutely no role for energy drinks in the adolescent and young population.
Mhm.
And so I want to make sure that people, because sometimes I think as parents, we're all busy, and you look at these things and you didn't even realize, oh my goodness. It happened in our house. We got a free product with our groceries one time, and 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 my wife, who's also a physician, was like, oh yeah, we can have it. And I was like, no, you didn't look at that. That's actually an energy drink, So I think drawing that distinction is going to be helpful for families, and that sports drinks may play some role. Energy drinks play no role in what we're talking about today. But for sports drinks, it's particularly helpful if kids are going to be out exercising, doing things in the heat for longer than an hour and exerting themselves. I think it plays some role. For shorter periods where they're not doing a lot of exertion, anything less than an hour, water is probably perfectly fine. It's probably actually the preferred drink. Now, where you get into a little nuances is in that some kids, if you flavor it a little bit, are going to be much more likely to hydrate than if it has no flavor. That's kind of a kid-specific thing. And I tell folks, you can flavor it a little bit as you need to encourage them or help them hydrate. But we want to avoid, products that have a lot of sugar in them and a lot of excess calories. They don't really necessarily need all of the additional minerals we talk about, particularly if they're only exercising for, an hour or less. And so water should be your mainstay. If you need a little flavoring, consider that's what you're doing, is you're offering a little flavoring. And it may encourage people to sip a little more frequently or take it more, but make sure it's not a sugar loaded drink, because that's going to work against your goals, and offer it frequently. And as I said in the beginning, make sure it's not an energy drink, or you may have a long night on your hands.
If you're saying, the flavor, is that something that we could like put some Gatorade into the water bottle and kind of just half and half it? Okay.
I'm a half and half kind of guy, or a 75-25 at my house. A little bit to provide a little bit of flavoring can be perfectly fine, And back in my old days, we used to have that big tub on the sideline, and they would mix it up, and you could kind of do that. Most people now are buying it in a plastic bottle in the store, but you can still create your own, the water bottle and things like that. You can try to make that, because again, it's mostly about the hydration, and I think otherwise healthy kids that are exercising for short periods need exposure to hydration, even when it's hot, even when they're swimming, things like that. Hydration is key. I don't think that they all need to be walking around getting the excess calories from a constant sports drink, if they're not in those really prolonged endurance activities out in the heat.
Yeah, makes sense.
One of the products I want to say that my kids love, and other people haven't thought about it, and I know they're out there now, are popsicles. Popsicles are wonderful, and a lot of these same companies now make their product in a popsicle type form. And so if you can find a way to exercise in the heat, keep it cold, I find it's a great way to encourage kids to hydrate too. And I'm sure there's lots of crafty people in your collective, and you can make your own popsicles at home. You can make them even healthier than you might purchase in the store. But I think it's another great way that makes hydration fun in the summer, and helps you work to kind of achieve your goals. Both having a fun summer, getting a popsicle, staying hydrated. Sounds good to me right now.
Yeah, that's a great tip. Okay, so if our kids are out in the sun for a long time then, and they maybe are showing signs of dehydration, what should we be looking for? What should we be kind of monitoring them to make sure that what they're doing, what they're not doing, what they're looking like, or should be looking like?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I will draw that distinction once again, that those signs that you're seeing are heat-related illness.
Yes, sorry.
No, it's good. That's a heat-related illness. And the first thing to do is to remove them from the heat, and recognize that's a heat-related illness. And it may be increased irritability. It can be fatigue in the early stages. It can just be that, I've got the blah. So the first thing to do is try to remove them from the heat, whether that's coming indoors, finding a shady place. If you're, out doing, if you're out at games or parks, being prepared beforehand, having umbrellas, shade, scouting out shade, being prepared of where it is you're going to be going, but remove them from that intense heat source, and then quickly offer up forms of hydration. Again, cold drinks are wonderful. Any drink's great, but the cold drinks, popsicles, things are good. You can use cool rags, to help cool them off around the neck, the axilla, and the groin. Those are the great places to start. I think that's key. And I remind all families that every year, fall football season, we'll see these 95-degree days. And if I don't want to predict it now, but I can pretty much guarantee you that in the fall, we'll have one heat-related death. And we know that those are all preventable. It's important to recognize those early signs of heat-related illness, remove them, and cool them.
That's a good segue, because then what are the long-term effects of these heat-related illnesses if they're not treated pretty quickly?
Yeah. Well, the big thing is we want to keep them from escalating. We want to make sure that we catch them early when they're fatigued, when they're when they're irritable and just not feeling well. We kind of want to catch that. We don't want to see it progress into those what we call mental status changes. All kinds of things you can see with severe heat related illnesses and collapse. Those are catastrophic. We
Mhm.
want to avoid those, and those aren't likely in young athletes or in young people, but they happen, and it requires preparation. And so I remind folks to be prepared, recognize those early signs and symptoms, remove them, start getting them hydrated. And the other part I'll put a plug in because I'm a sports medicine physician is these families hold tremendous power in the leagues and things that they play in. Talk to your leagues, talk to your coaches, see if they have a heat plan. In the summer, they should have a heat plan. And that plan should call for, if it's above a certain temperature and threshold, that they increase the number of water breaks that are available, that
Mhm.
they have emergency plans on site as to what to do if someone's playing in an event and they suffer a heat related illness, and particularly if it has an increase in severity. If parents ask and parents question, guess what? Leagues respond. And so ask the coach, ask the league, do we have a heat plan? Do we have an emergency action plan? We talk about three big things in sports medicine that can really be catastrophic, and one is heat. We talk about the heart, which is not what we're talking about today, and we talk about head, getting hit in the head. I remind them, heat is on there. They're the three H's.
Mhm.
Heat, heart, and head. Make sure that they have an emergency action plan in place as to how they're going to deal with the heat in the summer. And I think that's key. And if they don't have one, look for a professional or a very engaged parent, engaged family to help. There's a lot of great resources out there to help you develop a plan. And people are always looking for volunteers, and jump in there and help develop a plan for your team or your league. And I think that everyone will be grateful for that.
Yeah, that's a great tip. And, as a mom of three boys who are in sports, and especially the summer sports, baseball, we're on the hot turf and the hot fields. It's when you said those symptoms, it's actually, I'm irritable when I'm out there in the heat.
Oh
I
yeah,
one kind of, not working at top speed. So it feels, as someone who's not in the medical field, a little intimidating to say these are what you should look for, but are they going to be any different than what they might be on a normal day, just being grumpy? Are you going to
right.
see it in their face? Are you going to see it in their body language? I know that we have a cooler that we keep with wet washcloths in it. And so on a really hot day, we'll just kind of throw it to them on the sidelines and put
That's great.
huge amounts of ice in their water bottle.
That's great. That's great. That's excellent forward thinking there. And I encourage you to do it. And you mentioned one other thing I'll throw in there is for families that such as yourself is remember that the turf is actually many times warmer than the grass, because oftentimes the way those things are built with the rubber and those, it's great to get to practice all the time, but it is a challenge in that it can be even hotter on the turf than it is where you're watching in the stands as a parent.
Mm-hmm.
And so being aware of that and encouraging in between games that they're going somewhere, they're cooling off, get a cold drink, slurries, smoothies are great, kind of cools the inside as well as hydrating. And so really working hard to make sure that you have a plan in place when it's going to be a hot day and you're going to be out there on the turf for long periods of time. And
Okay.
so it's forward thinking is key.
Okay.
Prevention. These are all preventable complications if we just think about it, recognize it, and plan for it. It's hard as a parent, but I want to encourage people, they are preventable.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Any other tips that you want to leave us with before we depart?
I think that I've tried to emphasize a couple of things. One is be aware of heat-related illnesses. I said I think that's what we're really talking about when we talk about dehydration this time of the year, preventing heat-related illnesses. Understand that water is your number one. That's your go-to. That's your helper.
Mm-hmm.
Try to utilize other things that might be fun throughout the summer, popsicles. There is a role for sports drinks, particularly with long periods of exercise outside in the heat after an hour. Use them, as needed and sparingly. Offer drinks. Don't demand them. And then I think the last one I said is make sure you separate out what's an energy drink and what's a sports drink. Keep those separate. And most of all, just get out there with your kids and have fun this summer. I don't discourage anyone from playing sports in the summer, but sports can be safe if you have a plan, and encourage your leagues and teams to actually have a heat plan in the summer.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Canty. Thank you for educating us, for keeping us aware, and for keeping us safe this summer. We really appreciate it.
Oh, my pleasure. I hope everyone out there has a great summer, and I appreciate the opportunity to chat with you today.
Yes. Thank you.